Asterios Polyp, the 2009 graphic novel by David Mazzucchelli, or is it David Mazzucchelli, received many reviews in the mainstream press by people who very much missed the point of the book. So Kumar and I set out to dig into the true meanings of the book that can't be attained by simply following the plot, to the extent that it actually has one. This week you'll hear a flashback to our review, originally published February 15th, 2010. First, don't forget to take our listener survey to let us know what we're doing right or wrong as we put this show together and choose our topics. The link is in the show notes.
This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne, Australia. Today we're talking about Asterios Polyp by... Okay, now... we found that we're both sort of unclear on pronunciation of the author's name. I'm pretty sure it's Mazzucchelli, and you're pretty sure it's Mazzucchelli, so...
I think last time we did a Mazzucchelli book, we started gravitating towards Mazzucchelli. But I called him Mazzucchelli my whole life until we started this podcast. The first Mazzucchelli book we did on this podcast.
Yeah, which was City of Glass.
I
don't think we've ever talked about another book of his except for that, and then this.
No, but I think I have a hunch we're going to end up covering all of them. There aren't that many, and this is the third.
Well, yeah, that's right. We talked about Batman Year One.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and the
go ahead.
Is Daredevil, and all the other stuff is short stories. So.
Yeah. So David Mazzucchelli or Mazzucchelli, one of the two. Anyway, he did a graphic novel recently, which has been reviewed all over the internet. I mean, you can just find hundreds of reviews. And so we were emailing about this yesterday. We were talking about how mainstream media reviews really don't seem to know how to review a comic and just kind of give a story synopsis. And you mentioned that the Ng Swat Tong article from Comics Reporter that we talked about a couple weeks ago on the scripting podcast starts out with that exact point.
Yeah.
I found the quote. He's quoting a review in the New York Times by George Jean Gustines from July 31st, 2009. That review just totally ignores the visual aspect and talks about the story events. I found other examples like that in New York Magazine. They give a brief review talking about it having great art, but not giving any examples of the art and saying nothing about how it takes advantage of the comics medium. Entertainment Weekly, again, story synopsis. They mistakenly, we'll get to this I'm sure, but they mistakenly take the opening as Polyp watching a sex tape.
I saw even comic sites. A lot of them thought it opened with him watching a porn video.
Yeah, and you're supposed to think that when you first read it, but
yes.
Then later, if you're paying attention, you can catch that that's not what it was.
And if you write a review of it, you should probably double check it.
Yeah, well, I think he put that in there to punk the reviewers. So if the review says he was watching a sex tape, the reviewer didn't read it carefully enough.
Yeah, but I saw a lot of them that made that similar mistake.
Yeah, and the Entertainment Weekly review, the closest they come to talking about the art. This is the quote I copied into my notes. It's as if John Updike had discovered a bag of art supplies and LSD. Elegant, deceptively simple line work and nearly subliminal color symbolism make everything go down like candy. That's that's the extent of their commentary on the art. Otherwise, it's story synopsis.
Wow, there's nothing LSD-like about it, and there's nothing subliminal about the coloring. It's totally It's in your face. It's constant. I don't know. I don't understand where they're coming from. We're at a very strange stage where comics are becoming people are becoming aware that they exist.
Mm-hmm.
Who are not normally comics readers, and I think they have to fill content in these magazines about comic books, and they really don't understand.
Yeah, it's like asking me to do a movie review. I watch, like, last year I watched a record, like 5 or 6 movies in the entire year.
That's about how many I watch these days too. But it's not. I think it's a bigger. It's not like asking you. It's more like asking you to do a social analysis of Twitter or something. You know, like, or if you ask me, you know, I want you to write this article about Twitter. I'm like, what the hell is it? And then I go out and I'm like, oh my God, there are all these articles about Twitter. I better write one now because it's so popular. And then I write that Twitter is this thing for writing novels, and then publish it. And then everybody's like, oh, that must be what Twitter is. Well, that's kind of what the reviews of this book. A lot of the mainstream reviews are like.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw that kind of reviewing of movies or novels, you know, there'd be some kind of uprising among the readers, probably. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, they just review the comics as, you know, the way that they would review novels or movies. I think because they haven't quite figured out how to review a comic.
Well, I wonder if these people also, the same people who wrote these reviews, I mean, those specific people would have the same trouble writing about movies.
Well, that could be.
In terms of, you know, like editing and all those things that go together. Because, I mean, it's so, well, when we get to talking about the actual book, I mean, this is a book in which the style is the content.
Mm-hmm.
And to ignore the style is to ignore, I mean, how can you give a positive review of the book and not talk about, if you give a positive review of the book and you don't understand the art, then you're faking it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, I felt like, you know, giving a story synopsis is missing the point, because I don't think
Exactly.
the story is the main. The story is just sort of there to hang everything else on.
Exactly. Yes.
The important stuff.
Yes, to a certain extent, yes, it's true. But yeah, if you only talk about the story, you're missing 75% of what the book is about. And if you say, oh, this is a great book, it's the story about this guy who, you know, his apartment burns down and he goes off to live as a mechanic, and then he gets back with his wife, or he has all these memories about his time with his wife, and then you say, wow, this is a great book, then you've totally, you're lying. You don't actually think it's a good book. You don't understand that it's a good book, but you feel compelled to, you have some sort of editorial pressure to say it's a good book.
I found there was even an architectural magazine that reviewed it, I guess because he's an architect. I don't know.
Right. That would have been an interesting review, actually.
Anyway, so there are a lot of reviews out there, and there's no way we can cover everything in the book anyway. We'd be going on for hours. And so I don't even feel compelled to give a story synopsis.
Well, I think the synopsis that I gave is probably...
Yeah,
I spoiled the ending. See, I already spoiled the ending in the first 5 minutes, but it's not really, it's not relevant. I mean, well, it is kind of in the long run of things. But, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Main character, Asterios Polyp, his apartment is struck by lightning one night during a storm when many people think he's watching a porno, but he's not actually. And the place burns down, and he just, on a whim almost, just gets on the bus. He says, take me to the Greyhound bus to the furthest place possible, or based on the amount of money he has, I think. And he gets out to this town called Apogee, and he says he sees a garage that's hiring mechanics, and he says, is the job still open? The guy says yes. Asterios goes to the library and reads some books about fixing cars, and then comes back and starts work. And then he kind of reminisces about his relationship with Hannah, who he married, and then they split up. And then in the end, he drives back and they meet again, and you don't really know whether they really get back together in the end, but they're not on. There's no animosity between them anymore, at least.
Yeah.
That's the whole plot.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah. Okay, now to the important stuff. Yeah. But yeah, it's like, as I'm reading through this, it feels like every single detail of it has some deeper meaning.
Yes. Well, I read, there's an interview with Mazzucchelli in the New Comics Journal,
Okay.
and he doesn't like talking about Polyp, and he doesn't talk about the book in it at all, but he does make a point. At one point he says, if there is an opportunity for more than one thing to be happening at one time, you should take it. So every line, every mark has a double meaning. And not necessarily hidden meaning, but it serves at least two purposes.
Yeah, well, and there were several times I made a section of my notes called "How did he get these things to line up?" Where there are things that are just like crazily like these double meanings that like were just sort of luck in a sense. But I had three notes like that. One was Asterios was born on June 22nd, 1950. Interestingly, my birthday is also June 22nd.
Interesting.
But by being born on that date, he missed exactly half of the century.
Right.
Now, of course, this whole duality thing is an important point, and his stillborn twin, and so half of him is missing. And then the point that the line that Ursula has later, where she says, like, in terms of astrology, he's a Cancer but almost a Gemini.
Yes.
Which I am.
Right.
But then there's the double meaning Cancer Polyp, his name, and almost a Gemini, his twin, is missing. So I mean, but having him born on that day, he has that double meaning to being born on June 22nd. Triple. Okay.
Yeah, he's almost a Gemini. He's a Cancer, right? Is that right? He's a Cancer, but almost a Gemini.
Yep.
So he's almost a twin. He's not, because his twin died.
Mm.
But he is a Cancer, which is a Polyp, which is his name. Meanwhile, the name Polyp, I saw some note somewhere that said Polyp must have been.
Yeah, well, there's another point about the name. I did some research on that.
Right, was short for half. The name has been cut exactly in half.
Right, Polyphemus.
It been Polyphemus, which is the Cyclops from the Odyssey, and that's it's charged in a whole other way.
Yes.
So that one line about her saying, you're almost a Gemini but a Cancer, it's so loaded in like six different ways.
Yeah. My second note on how did he get these things to line up? The musician Calvin Kohotek.
Okay.
We both looked at the annotations on the Stumptown blog that mentions there's a Czech composer. Can't pronounce his name, but his first name, but his last name is Kohotek.
Okay.
Now, when I hear the word Kohotek, I think of a comet that was sighted in 1973. I was in third grade, and there's this whole comet asteroid theme going through the whole book.
Right.
So,
yes, and again, his name, because Asterios is some derivation of asterism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is some sort of celestial, some group of stars of some sort.
Yeah. I think it was a group of stars that's not a constellation, and there was something more to it. I forget what that was now.
Right. He says at one point, Asterios, and part of the whole point of the book is there's no way for us to not jump ahead of ourselves here. But part of the whole point is he says one thing and he does another. Because of this duality that is ingrained into his consciousness, he is obsessed with things being symmetrical, and he believes everything is one way and is not. I'm not putting this right at all, but he believes in strict codification of things, and that things that are outside of that codification are irrelevant, basically. But he tells Ursula at one point, he says he doesn't believe that objects whirling through the firmament have any effect on his life.
Yeah.
That effect. But meanwhile, his name is Asterios, and there's this meteor at the end of the book, which seems like it might have some effect on his life.
I found the note in the Stumptown thing. The name Asterios is probably derivative of the word asterism. An asterism is a pattern of stars seen in Earth's sky that is not a constellation, such as Ursa Major.
Right.
There are mostly simple shapes, and few stars make these patterns easy to identify, which Asterios Polyp likes, and thus particularly useful to those just learning to orient themselves when viewing the night sky.
Right. Isn't there a line about... Doesn't she give him a line about the cosmos being a mirror or something like that as well?
Possibly.
We'll never find it because there are no page numbers in the book.
Oh, yes, that was driving me crazy. I wanted to give page notes in my notes.
I think the only way to do it is to mark up your book, which I was not going to do. But
No.
I seem to recall in that same conversation she said something like the cosmos is a mirror on our lives, or some effect, something to that effect. And I thought, wow, that's really like... Because the thing about reflections also comes back to the twin brother. Because every time he sees... there's one stage where he sees she asks him, do you have any brothers or sisters? And he says, no. Mm-hmm. And you see his reflection in the car window, and it's like the twin, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I mean, that's a totally loaded thing, too.
Mm-hmm. My third, how did he get these things to line up? There's the whole Greek thing with the Odyssey and all that, and the architecture and references to the Pantheon. And Pantheon is also the publisher of the book.
Yes.
Did he choose the publishers just so it would fit in with no Doubleday? I don't want Doubleday. No. I want Pantheon.
This is an interesting thing because I mean this is the comic book creation podcast, and the question is, if you were a creator, how would you? And you're always into the punning and things. So the question is, how would you? How, as a creator, do you approach something like this where, it reminded me so much of Watchmen, because Watchmen had all those scenes where there were multiple things building on a single thing, and often with in that case where Moore and Gibbons were accidentally stumbling upon things, and they're saying, oh, yeah, there's that connection, we should put it in.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he's just kind of writing along and then realized he had a possibility of adding... I don't know. He worked 9 years on this book, so he had time to work things out, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Yeah, the amount of time that he put into it would account for having the time to stumble across all these things that would work so well.
Yeah, well, there's nothing in the book every single thing in the book shows up at least twice.
Yeah, well, that was another thing I put in my notes, because there are so many lines of dialogue or ideas that show up twice.
Yeah,
I've got a whole list of those.
Every line, every object. I think you see almost every object at least twice. And sometimes, sometimes he forces it on you because, the shot of Asterios' apartment in New York, he shows it from the exact same angle every time he opens on it. Mm-hmm. That shot of the living room.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's totally in your face. Wow. Okay. So where do you want to start talking about it?
Well, I guess I'm just kind of going through my notes in order, except I've already had to jump around.
If we're not going to talk about the story, we should at least mention something about the art style, because that's in a very general sense.
Okay.
To give people an idea of what the book is like if you were to flip through it.
Yeah, well, I would say, it's not what the way he drew Batman. It's different from that.
It's Batman was, what year did that come out? 87, and then City of Glass was 94, and this is 2009, and you can see he's evolved down this line where his style's gotten totally looser and cartoonier, a lot airier. It's not that kind of noir packed panels of Batman. And then even, City of Glass was pretty packed too. But it's not just packed with objects. He doesn't even... One of the amazing things about it is, which is I've never seen anyone really do in another comic, is he does not necessarily put all the panels right to the edge of the page, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. It's not like a 6-panel page and 6 panels and it covers the entire page. There might be a few inches from the margins of the page. Mm-hmm. it's just totally loose and airy and very easily flows through, and the line flows through again because he has a cartoony, very soft style. It flows through very easily. That was it's kind of a New Yorker kind of style. Like I always associate with New Yorker cartoons, or more of a European.
Yeah, well, he makes a lot of use of white space and arranging panels in, some special way.
Yes.
One of the websites was pointing out, I think it's at the end of the big argument that Hana and Asterios have, and the panels are arranged in such a way that it's kind of pointing down to the lower right corner.
That's right. Yeah, they accelerate. The arrangement of the panels is totally. That's part of how he controls the flow of the eye completely. Rather than have 6, normally people would cover the page with panels and have the flow of the eye based around where the characters are placed, whereas he actually does it where the panel is on the page. And every page is different. And when he starts talking about very abstract ideas, philosophical ideas, the panels completely disappear, and you just get like masses of objects all over the place.
When some people pointed out that feels kind of like Scott McCloud understanding comics.
Yes, well, that's part of that, and there's also, there's lots of influences in there. There's Hernandez brothers are in there. There's one character that could have come straight out of Palomar, and there's sometimes the sound effects have that kind of 3D like 1950s type comics thing. There's some definitely some Chris Ware influence in certain scenes. He seemed to just embrace everything and not really wasn't ashamed of it. It was like definitely like I'm going to use a kind of Chris Ware in this scene, and I'm going to do a little Scott McCloud in this scene.
Yeah, well, a lot of the point of it seems to be that it is a comic, and he's experimenting with comics, and you couldn't make a movie of this really without losing 75% of. Well,
the way you would make a movie about it is to make a movie about movies. That's the only way. To diverge, and this is not completely off topic. If you look at something like The French Lieutenant's Woman, if you ever read that book is a book about fiction, really, and about novels. And if you watch the movie, in the movie version, the movie is about a cast of people making a movie of The French Lieutenant's Woman. So the movie's kind of about making a movie. If you were to try to adapt this into some other medium, like a movie, it would have to be about making movies. You couldn't make it about being about comics, because the whole thing about the space between the panels is something. And that's such a critical thing. Because the other reason I think it's critical is because, as I mentioned in the email to you yesterday, there's a scene where Hannah is teaching her students, and she holds 2 blocks together. She puts them next to each other with a space in between. She says, "How many blocks do you see?" And all the students say 2, and one says 3 because there's the space in between. And the third. And for me, that was like the panel. That was the spaces between the panels. That's an additional panel, and that's how you create time out of those panels. Which is, part of the whole thing of the book is creation of time, because that. We're getting into the music, because the whole thing is he compares it to music at one stage, and the analogy is so exactly right. You're like, oh yeah, comics are music, because you look at sheet music, and it's a code which tells you how much time. This page of sheet music is 3 seconds, and this page of music is 6 minutes, but it's the same page. You know what I mean? And it's exactly the same. But I think we'll get to that scene more, I hope, in detail later. But
okay. I wasn't quite getting that point before, and I saw one of the commentators said the medium that comics are most like is music, but I wasn't quite grasping that till just now, like why that was. But okay.
Well, that was one of it, and the other thing is the musical notes on a page are they're a codification of what a note is. It's not actually a musical note, if you know what I mean. It's not a note being plucked on a guitar. And similarly, there's on the page. you get drawings of people which are not actually people. They're just marks on the page which represent people. Mm-hmm. And Asterios makes a speech at one point to his students about, I'm not going to remember the terms now, but like factual art, and he had two types of art because everything is two for Asterios. But one is kind of functional art, like an abstract painting is functional because it's just paint on paper. It's not supposed to represent anything else. And the other type of art is representational art. As he says, for example, a painting of a saint is one of his examples, and there is a painting of a saint in the book, which is another huge thing, which, which we'll put off till later. But there's that whole point about representational art, and comics are that kind of representational art, which he does not like. He likes that kind of factual. He likes, what I guess we'd call industrial or practical art, which a building with no trimmings, is purely functional. Mm-hmm. And that's comics too. I mean, and that's what that music is. That music is representational art because you're not actually making music; you're making marks, which represent music, and time, which represent time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't. I know this is maybe sort of out of nowhere, but there's a fair amount of humor in the book, and particularly with Stiffly Major, who makes all those malapropisms.
Yes, including his name.
Yeah, but it seems like every time there's something funny, even that has a deeper meaning, and I started being afraid to laugh at them because I got to think about this. What's the deeper meaning of this joke?
I didn't think about the second meaning so much, but sometimes his malapropisms were better than the original phrases.
And
did you make a list of them?
I didn't know.
No, I can't remember half of them, but
my favorite was the one that actually where Ursula said this is what he would say. Hindsight is 50-50.
Hindsight is 50-50, right. Right. There's another one at the end where he meets Polyp in the hospital, and he says, Ursula says, I need to do more male bondage. There was almost everything, not almost everything, but he came up with so many, and often they were better. I can't remember. I was trying to remember them this morning, and I can't remember them off the top of my head.
But yeah, all of them seem to serve some further purpose than just being funny.
I don't know if they I found that one that she said about Hunting being 50-50 was quite deep because of the conversation she was having with Asterios at that time. But I don't know about some of the other ones were quite funny, but I don't know if they had that much of a deeper meaning.
I mean a little bit maybe.
Maybe, but the thing about the humor is interesting because this is a very technical book, as we've already
established.
Yeah, but it's really warm and it has a real human heart, and even it's drawn in a very technical way, but it's so softly drawn, like the curves are so soft that it's very inviting and warm, and it's very human, and the ending is it's a heartwarming kind of ending, and it's a double ending because not only does Asterios end up kind of starting to mend fences with Hannah, but then you get that final shot of Ursula and Stiffly and their son up in the treehouse watching the shooting star, and it's just this kind of beautiful, warm finish. So I don't think that can be understated. I think that's a huge component. I think despite the lack of plot, it's a humanist, really.
Yeah.
At To the Batpoles podcast, we look at the many sides of our favorite hero, Batman. For example, Encyclopedia Batman.
It's the basic formula for escaping from the Siamese human knot. I just recalled it.
Civic Responsibility Batman.
Only a criminal would disguise himself as a licensed bonded guard, yet callously park in front of a fire hydrant.
Impish Humor Batman.
Look at him, Robin. That crooked bird's going crazy.
And more. See if you can identify other sides of the Caped Crusader, and then join us at To the Batpoles podcast, Available wherever podcasts are found or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Batman has many sides, but can we trust him to save the day?
You can be sure, if it's Batman.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to go into this. I had a whole list of the pieces of dialogue that were repeated.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the first one is the alleged sex tape that isn't, because then we see when it was recorded and they're actually eating.
Yeah.
But what Hana is saying is clearly meant to. It would be appropriate in a sexual situation, but it's not a sexual situation.
Yes.
The place where Hana is dreaming that she's being smothered.
Yes.
And she says, ahem, and then later when Asterios won't let her talk, she says the exact same thing.
Wow, I never noticed that. It's a good catch, Tim. I never would have picked that up, because when I saw the smothering scene, all I thought about was Asterios' brother, because he thought that he maybe suffocated him in the womb, and that's why he was born. But it was Hannah's dream, but that's an amazing catch.
There's the pseudo somebody brand line, which Asterios says about her table when she's bringing furniture into their apartment when they get married. He says, "I don't want the pseudo somebody brand." And then she says the same thing about the cotton swab that breaks off in her ear.
Yes, I saw that one. And that is, but that one's quite
deep. First time. I'm sorry?
Actually, that one's quite deep in a way, because they start to kind of copy each other. And he says things that she said, and she said things that he said, which is funny because they're so. The whole thing is they're different people. And one thing that he does in this book, which is great, which he does in two ways, and one is he distinguishes people by how he draws them. He actually physically draws them differently. And when they become very individualistic, especially with Hannah and Asterios, she becomes this mass of pink lines, and he becomes this cyan blueprint of a person.
Yeah.
And that's the way he differentiates people. But when they become closer, like she would wear like a blue jacket.
Oh, yeah. That's I wanted to get to that, but I've got a couple of these others
over.
First,
and another thing is with the dialogue. I mean, because the whole thing seems to be about how they're not connecting almost, like during their marriage, like he's so arrogant and self-centered that he cannot acknowledge her existence almost. In a way, I mean, it's not that bad, but he practically ignores a lot of her and her artistic endeavors. But they become deeply connected in a sense, and you get that through the dialogue and through the crossover in colors. And the other thing I was going to mention about that was the speech balloons is another way, because every character has a different font and practically
different balloon shape.
Different balloon shape, which was to me was really interesting, because a lot of people seem to complain about word balloons in comics, because they seem to think they're really ugly and they wish there was some other way to do word balloons. Well, I used to see some messages all the time. Oh, I hate word balloons. They're so ugly. These big white things in the middle of the picture or whatever. And Mazzucchelli has found a way to make the word balloons are the art. I mean, they're a part of the art. And sometimes he does crazy symbolic things. Like at one point, it looks like a dice. Like the word balloon is a cube. Like he doesn't think how to answer this guy. Yes, no, maybe. And it's like a cube. And so. That was great, and almost nobody really knows what to do with word balloons in comics. The only other time was Alex Robinson's Tricked, which I thought he really did some amazing things with the word balloons in that book.
Yes.
And this was the second time I really thought, wow, that's so great, and I wish more people would actually do that. But the problem is with computer lettering, you can't really do that as easily. So maybe as advice for listeners, they should take 9 years out of their time and hand letter, get them right.
You've jumped all over my notes just in the past two or 3 minutes, but
Well, I'll tell you, because I've got like 10 pages of notes here, and I've thrown them out. I'm just like, I have no way of going through. It's like it's in 11-point font, single space, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going through all that. So I've kind of abandoned them. But anyway,
okay.
Sorry.
But I did have a couple other repeated bits of dialogue. There was another one of Hannah and Asterios, a creative challenge. She says that of working with Willie Ilium, and then later he says it of getting the solar-powered Cadillac to run.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other one is the adding a window to the wall.
That's a key one. That's a
Yes.
really critical.
Mm-hmm.
Because Asterios, when he's going around to students, observing their projects, and
the one says, I'm thinking of adding fenestration to this planar surface, and he says,
right.
How about just adding a window to this wall?
Right. How about just adding some window? He says arrogantly to his student, right, kind of insulting his. And then Stiffly Major, at the end, says, "I'm thinking about adding some windows to this wall
of the treehouse."
Right, of the treehouse. And, Asterios is like, good idea. And that's exactly the words right out of Asterios' mouth, yet Stiffly Major is kind of the opposite of the kind of guy that Asterios would have taken seriously at the beginning of the book.
Yeah. And then the treehouse is the first thing that Asterios has ever actually built, because all of the things that he designed were never built.
Yes, they call him a paper architect. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And that's kind of a key shift in the book, is he finally actually built something.
Yeah, and we get like two or three whole pages of construction of the treehouse. Right.
Because there's this whole thing about it's a long sequence, isn't it, where they're building it. He devotes a serious amount of time in the book to it, like 3 pages. Because the whole thing about Asterios is, because his projects are never built, they exist purely in an Aristotelian world of forms. They're ideals, right? There's no poorer actual physical versions. And this is the first time he actually builds a physical object, which means he's kind of coming out of the world of forms, the world of ideals, and coming into the real world.
As I was looking at different reviews, I found that some of them would briefly mention it takes a lot of inspiration from the Odyssey or from Greek myths or something, but it never would go into any detail about that in most cases.
Yes.
I did some. Stumptown did. Yes. Yeah, I took some notes, and some of them were things that Stumptown also got, and some were from others or things that I looked up myself. I mean, I'm in no way an expert in classical literature, Greek literature, but I found some things. Wikipedia says that the Odyssey begins, they say, in medias res, which means in the middle of things, and so does this book.
Yes.
Because we get half the story in flashback, which I guess is true of the Odyssey also.
Yes.
He teaches in at a university in Ithaca, which Ithaca is Odysseus's home.
Yes.
And then we mentioned before that Polyp is half of the word Polyphemus, the Cyclops from the Odyssey.
Well, this is if I can interrupt, this is where we're going to get into trouble, because if you say that, I don't want to say based on the Odyssey, but if even if it uses the Odyssey as a model, is Asterios Odysseus, because all the signs point to him being the Cyclops, because of his name, and also the thing about his. Then he gets his eye knocked out, right? Or his eye injured. So he's basically one-eyed, and then he makes this line about how his parallax vision is messed up, and parallax that's all about having, not having depth perception, right? In his case, and it's especially true in his case, because he has no depth perception. He only sees the surface of things.
Yeah, even before the eye injury.
And when he turns into Blueprint Asterios, he's actually depicted as two-dimensional. So he seems to be more on the one hand, he's kind of on this quest as Odysseus was, but on the other hand, he seems to be the Cyclops, which is blocking Odysseus from getting any further. And interestingly, he loses the eye at the very end of the book, when you'd think he would actually supposed to regain his vision.
That's
you can see the light.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a symbolic reinforcing the original idea rather than showing him moving on.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though in terms of his character, he does seem to be moving on. I mean, in the present day scenes, he's not nearly as overbearing as he is in the flashback scenes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. This is the thing about the journey, because it seems like he has to go through some journey to become a better person in the end. And you almost see none of his arrogance, because you'd think when he first moves to Apogee and Ursula's giving him all this stuff about astrology and stuff, you'd think he'd just explode. Because that's kind of like what old Asterios would have done. But he just kind of seems to accept it, and he says, okay, maybe I can buy that or something. You know, he's almost accepting. But I think the thing is, again, maybe because it starts in medias res, he's at rock bottom at the beginning of the book. And then his apartment burns down, so it's even worse, and he's got nothing. So I think he can only really, he just has to take what's given to him. So I think maybe the turning point of the novel is really page 1.
Yeah, although that's interesting, because the first time you read it, that first scene, you really don't understand most of what's going on.
That's right. Yeah. And you don't. Also, the first time you don't really get the relevance of him grabbing. He grabs 3 objects. This is a key. I guess this is plot. There is plot in the book. He grabs 3 objects. His father's lighter and his watch, which he had since he was a kid, and a
pocket knife.
Right, a pocket knife, a Swiss Army knife, which he found on the beach with Hannah one time. And you kind of read the book the first time through, and then later on, she confronts him and says, "If you could only take 3 objects with you, what would you do?" He said, "I only think in terms of 2." And then the second time you read it, you get to the fire, and he's in the situation, the hypothetical situation we were talking about, where the apartment burns down, and he's got to take 2 objects. He takes 3. So already at that stage, he's already changed his ways a little bit, even in the first couple of pages.
Yeah, but you can't appreciate it yet.
That's right. You can't appreciate it. And I think maybe the book would have been a hard read if he had been full on the whole way through, instead of having that kind of half-warm Hannah side to him.
Yeah, and of course, when you're first reading it, you don't quite get like what are all those tapes that he's got.
Yes,
but he's been making video of his all of his life in the apartment.
Yeah,
and I thought it was interesting the comparison of that later to the terracotta soldiers in China.
Yes.
And that's kind of hard to explain what the connection is, and it also sort of is evocative of the missing twin. That's
right.
That's the reason he gives for having the video.
Right. There were 2 things interesting, because that thing about the terracotta soldiers shows up twice, as with everything in the book. I think once it shows up where you just see you see the image of it, and then I think they talk about it later on.
Yeah.
Or I think they talk about it, and at one point it's described by the narrator, who is actually Asterios' never-born twin. But somebody calls it a shadow of the living world, like the clay soldiers, the terracotta soldiers.
Yeah, that's what Hannah calls it when he explains it to her.
Right, a shadow of the living world. And I thought, well, that's kind of like the allegory of the cave. And was that Plato or was that Aristotle? But the whole thing about it's like a person is tied up in a cave, and they can only face in one direction, and they see in that direction. They can only see the wall of the cave, the back wall, and what they see are shadows of people who are outside the cave. So the person assumes that this is the real world, the shadows. And the real world is, they don't realize that there's actually a real world. It must be Aristotle, right? World of forms, a more pure world or something. I don't know. Anyway, once you get outside the cave, you can see the real world, and that struck me as a connection there. But I also found something. There was another connection, and maybe it has nothing to do with anything, or maybe it's relevant.
But Plato's allegory of the cave.
Plato. Okay,
Yeah.
There you go. The king who was buried with all the terracotta soldiers died just before his 50th birthday.
Oh, jeez.
And Asterios' apartment burns down on his 50th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, someone makes the point that every 7 years, the longest lifespan of any cell in your body is 7 years. So every 7 years, you have a completely new body from the one you had 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one character, which means that Asterios, on the day his apartment burns down, is the first day of his 8th lifespan by this reckoning. But this character seems to point out that because of that cycle of 7 years is why people get a 7-year itch and they feel like breaking up with someone and finding a new partner after 7 years, which Asterios does not. He seems to want to get back with Hannah at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't hold true for him, but I thought there must have been some sort of connection between the king being 49 and Asterios being 50.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that connection is, but it seems,
and then
like
it's
relevant.
on his 50th birthday. He doesn't die, but all of his his terracotta soldiers die.
Yes, exactly.
His videos die.
Yeah, right.
And another point about the videos, you notice when he explains to Hannah about the videos, he says he can't imagine ever wanting to watch them. But then at the beginning of the story, that's what he's doing.
Yeah, wow. Good catch on that one, too. I never picked up on that. That's an excellent point. Yes.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody can ever pick up on everything in this book. There's not unless you read it about 10 times, probably. Because there were plenty of things in other people's notes that I was going, oh, geez, slapping my forehead, you know.
Yeah. That's an incredible pickup. Yeah, he said he would never watch them. See, I only read the book twice, and I wanted to read it. I without any exaggeration, I wanted to read it 4 times before the podcast. And I only got to it twice.
Yeah, I read it twice, and then I went through it once more quickly with the Stumptown annotations.
Yeah, I think it would have. I think every reading, you'd probably get more of the complete texture of it.
Yeah. By the way, I should say I'm planning to link to those Stumptown annotations from the Deconstructing Comics site when I post this.
Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to talk, or try to talk, about the whole chapter where he descends into Hades.
Okay, yep, the Orpheus chapter, yeah.
Right. All done in purple. And
yes.
Well, the whole color thing is another thing that we still haven't gotten to, but it's on my notes.
Well, we talked about it a little bit with the characters.
A little bit, yeah. But this chapter, you really don't get it if you don't know about Orpheus. When I read it the first time, it's like, well, okay. The second time, I Googled it and read on Wikipedia about Orpheus. Like, oh, okay. I kind of see what's going on here. But, yeah, the kind of the larger point is that the book really demands a lot of the reader in terms of background knowledge and in picking up all of these things that are in it.
Yes, and I'm going to say yes and no. And I'm going to say, okay, here's how two things about it. One is, that's the only scene I felt that you really needed to know something outside of the book. You had to know the story of Orpheus. And the other thing was the point about, it had to do with the scene with the music. And he makes the... I'm going to have to find it. It's going to be impossible to find, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't tell you what page it's on.
No.
I just opened to it.
Okay, whoa, I found it. I opened it up and I found it.
Okay.
And the musician, they meet this guy. Hannah is doing stage designs for a play, which is being staged by this guy named Willie Iliam. And the play is Orpheus Underground. And they meet with the guy who's doing the music, who we've mentioned earlier. And he says, In a cacophony of information, each listener, by focusing on certain tones and phrases, can become an active participant in creating a unique polyphonic experience. Which means that every reader of the comic is going to read it on some level, and every reader is going to have a different experience of it. Because some people are going to pick up on the Odyssey stuff, some people are not. Some people are going to pick up on the word balloons, some people are not. And all those various things, every listener is going to focus on certain tones and phrases and come away with something different. So I didn't think it was really that relevant if you missed out on all the allusions to the Odyssey. Except for Orpheus Underground.
Yeah. And that title, Orpheus Underground, is interesting. I think it was in the Stumptown notes. It says the whole story of Orpheus takes place underground, and so it's a little bit unnecessary to say underground.
Yes.
Although I don't know the first thing that makes me think of, and this is just me, is the original title of Alice in Wonderland was Alice's Adventures Underground.
Oh, right. That might be relevant in some way. But doesn't Orpheus start above ground?
I think the story begins above ground. Yeah, and of course in that chapter of this book he begins above ground.
Yes, and then he goes into the subway.
And I love how Cerberus is a nice doggy.
Yeah.
with 3 heads.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of the humor in the book. Let's see. There's a major point made early on. It's possible for someone to freely alter his own perception of reality in order to overlap with that of another. And I think that's, that ties into each person having kind of their own word balloons, showing their own worldview, and then the way that we see Asterios and Hannah relate to each other in terms of the coloring and the art style and the two of them.
Yes.
I feel like that's really a major point of the book right there that's stated early on.
It's interesting because there's a couple of points where people say... I think Hannah says you have to ignore what people say and watch what they do. And I think Ursula says a very similar thing later on, or somebody says you just have to pay attention. I mean, in this book you just have to pay attention. And also, if you ignore what they're saying, you've still got the shape of the balloons and the shape of the font and the shape that they're drawn in, and you can get their personality just by looking at them. So I thought that's what I read into... that bit.
But you mentioned already how, especially when he wants to show them being really separate from each other, that they've got those different styles and colors, and then like in that fight scene, it sounds like a superhero book. In the argument scene, he really plays with that a lot, and that's not the only scene where he does, but when she blows up at him, then the whole room is in her pink and her cross-hatching, and he's isolated in his architectural drawing style.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he plays with the color thing in a lot of ways. You mentioned already how they're wearing each other's colors when they're married. And then in that final scene when they meet up, then the palette is all different. It's all these greens and stuff that had nothing to do with their colors.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the other color that shows up a lot is yellow, because all of the apogee scenes are kind of yellow tinted.
Yeah, yellow and
purple. And the fire is yellow as well in his apartment. And the fire in Hades is too, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, that's the only yellow. All the rest of that scene is purple except for the fire is yellow.
Yeah, and he has a dream of his twin brother at one stage too, which, as I recall, I think it's the one where they're rowing the boat. He has a dream that he's a Siamese twin, and they're rowing a boat together. And I think that was in yellow. But I might be confusing
I
with
think
another
so.
dream of his
Well,
brother.
There are several dreams of his brother. I think all of those dreams are kind of purple and yellow,
Hang on a second. I
as I
might be able
recall.
to find it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just when he's on the... it's a different one. He's on the bus. It's just before he gets on the bus to Apogee. Or he's dreaming on the bus, actually. And he imagines he's entering the Parthenon. And he sees his brother Ignacio tied up in a hospital bed, or infirm in a hospital bed. And then he pulls off his mask and says, "Got a cigarette?" And that scene was in yellow.
Yeah.
And I thought there was another one, but maybe the one where he's rowing the boat with his brother is yellow as well, as a Siamese.
Okay. Yeah.
And that ends with a giant wave, which forms a yin yang, which is a whole other thing. About duality, and it also it's not just about duality; it's about two asymmetrical shapes, like the yin and yang coming together to form a symmetrical shape, which is Asterios and Hannah coming together to form a complete whole, I guess, in the long run.
Somebody pointed out also that when they're living together, the furniture that she brings into his apartment is pink. Yes. Yeah. And apropos of nothing, something that I realized, I don't think this was in anybody else's notes, but when he gets that solar-powered Cadillac to run, and he makes the point to Ursula that it wasn't. She says, Stiffly told me he could find you a car in good shape for like a few $100s. And Asterios says, I'm sure that's true, but that car wouldn't run on sunlight. And she has a question mark. I think the point there is that Hannah's last name is Sonnenschein. Sunshine. Oh.
Wow. That's another amazing pickup. Wow, you were really on fire. I think the catching. I never would have picked that up.
Let's see. I think we pretty much done the color thing. Oh, I had a line in my notes. Color separation has a double meaning here, where in the printing sense, and also they're separated by colors when they're alienated from each other.
Well, those colors, I think the colors are actually the printer's primaries, right? The pink and...
the cyan and magenta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's key. Although apparently some of the color range has been... the whole book is printed on recycled paper, and apparently... people who saw preview copies on glossy paper had more, the color range was better. I think some of it's been lost a bit on the grainy paper, apparently. But anyway.
See, make that point of cyan and magenta. The CMYK colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So, but then the purple would be a combination of the cyan and magenta, I guess. So I don't know if that has some meaning to it or not, but you can't really overlook anything.
No,
in this book.
No.
Another thing in the argument scene where he's being overbearing as usual. And he says, "Fine, if you'd rather be with Willie Chimera than me." Then you see a panel, round panel, of course, because round is her shape.
Yeah.
Completely circular panel of the back of her head, and the panel border is a thick red. So you got a red circle there.
Yeah.
Right before
she gets that thick red circle a couple of times.
I don't remember where else, but
I seem to recall seeing it twice, but anyway.
And then that's when she kind of blows up. Now, at the bottom of that page, you've got two things that apparently Asterios is thinking that he could say but doesn't, and they've got red X's on them.
Yeah.
And that gave the page kind of this tic-tac-toe feeling.
Yeah.
The circle and the X's.
I picked that up, yeah.
So, just another interesting thing about that scene. And speaking of that scene, that last panel, it's the whole page where she's breaking down. She's sitting on the sofa, and the cat jumps up on the sofa with her. And I know there's several things about this page. You know what I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Where the whole room has been the magenta cross-hatching.
Yeah.
And suddenly in that panel, that magenta cross-hatching is just her and the cat. And the sofa has become like an architectural drawing, the blueprint style. And she says, "Why do you always let him talk to me like that?" And I assume she's talking to the cat about Asterios.
Oh, no, that's
I
not how I read it at all.
Well, I had another possible interpretation. Well, tell me what yours was. Might be the same.
Mine is that she's talking to Asterios about Willie Ilium.
Yeah.
Because Willie is always kind of giving her insulting,
trying to hit on her,
double entendres, and she seems to ignore them the whole time. And Asterios doesn't say anything about them; he just lets them slide, even though she's his wife. And this page, to me, there was no doubt about that she was talking about the way Willie spoke to her.
It's just that that interpretation for me didn't quite fit into everything else she had said in that scene.
It did to me.
Like
to me, she was kind of talking in. She's kind of double speaking. I mean, she's not saying what she really means. She's trying to talk around it. And she says, just because somebody's quiet doesn't mean he doesn't have an opinion. When she's really saying, just because I'm quiet doesn't mean I don't have an opinion. Maybe all that person wants in a while is a little recognition. And she's talking. I always saw it as she was talking about herself. Both times I read through it. And then he says, "Wait a minute, who are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And she says, "Why do you always let him talk to me like that?"
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence on which interpretation to go with. I can see a good case for either one.
I only saw one other person I think mention this scene, and I think they interpreted it the same way I did. But they never.
The interpretation I read, like the guy thought it was a really stunning scene, but didn't really give his interpretation clearly. So I didn't get any backup from or help from that. Maybe you found a different review of it, but
no, I did. I mean, I'm just going like, I mean, for me there was no interpretation of the scene. I only read it in one way, if you know what I mean.
Okay. The only other, I think we've touched on pretty much everything else that I had, except one other note I made from the Stumptown blog about the ending. Saying the quote from Stumptown is, "Echoing the story of Orpheus, before our two lovers are reunited, they are lost forever." Which might be, although, yeah. Now,
in a sense, well, he's driving in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
The car stops. He loses visibility completely.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because the first time you read the book, you don't know where he's driving to anyway.
Yeah, he never says, "I'm going to go see Hana."
Yeah, he just gets in a car and drives away. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, where's he going? And you see one of the most beautifully drawn sequences in the book where he's driving through the country. You see all those things you see when you're driving. You know, you see the shot of the suburbs off the side of the highway and all the houses are the same. And I just thought, wow, that was so amazing. And But anyway, you don't know where he's going. So I guess maybe they are completely lost to each other in a sense. And you don't even know where she is. Really, you don't know
Right.
anything about the divorce, or you don't hear what happened to her after they divorced. You don't even know that he knows where she lives.
Yeah.
So I guess in a sense they are completely lost to each other. But
Well, as far as we know, anyway. Because
Yes.
he did know where to find her.
yes.
Apparently, near Minneapolis, St. Paul, based on the highway sign in the one panel.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I know this is total spoiler. Everybody who hasn't read it should stop the podcast. But the meteor at the
Yes.
end.
Yes.
Now, I everything else in the book, all the other points really sort of point to that meteor hitting the house. At the same time, though, looking at that panel, you can't tell how close the meteor is to us in relation to the house.
It's genius.
I mean, it could completely miss the house.
Yeah.
It could land much closer to us than the house is. Although that would sort of spoil the symbolism, I suppose. But
I think the book has a positive ending. I personally cannot accept that the meteor is going to hit the house and kill them. You know what I mean? Because it's such an upbeat ending. That I can't imagine that Mazzucchelli would suddenly say, "Oh, I'm going to kill off my main characters." But he has staged the panels in such a way that it could be right there, or it could be super far away.
Although I think that sort of fits with the whole idea of different people's points of view, and depending on how you're looking at it.
Exactly.
And then, of course, from the point of view of Apogee, it's a shooting star.
Yes. That's right. So how far is he from Apogee? And of course, let's not forget that the meteor is in Apogee, which is the closest point of orbit around the Earth.
All right, so the farthest.
Is it farthest? So it's not.
Yeah, I saw a note about that someplace. He says that he wants to go as far away as he can get, and he ends up in Apogee, which is the farthest point of a rotation around an orbit, I should say.
Okay. I would say that what's happening in this scene is that he wants the house and the meteor to be in the same shot. He wants the meteor to be big because the meteor is important.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think. Well, I'm not gonna read it as the meteor's hitting the house. I think it's dramatic, but I think it's only supposed to be dramatic. I don't think it's supposed to.
Yeah,
be...
well, and I think he leaves it open to interpretation. He doesn't show the impact.
Yes, but I mean, I don't even think we're supposed to interpret it as hitting the house. That's what I'm saying.
Because I think a lot of the reviews I read did seem, if they got to the ending, they did seem to see it as it hits the house.
Well, if it hits the house, I mean, what kind of emotional reaction is he trying to get, or what point is he trying to make by having it hit the house? How could this guy totally redeem himself over the course of the book and go back and have this totally nice, heartwarming ending after having all these heartwarming characters, and then suddenly do this completely cynical thing at the end? It just seems...
Well, like I said, the Stumptown note is that it echoes Orpheus. Before our two lovers are reunited, they are lost forever. I don't know. That's
I thought the lost
forever
had to do with the car, driving the car through the snow.
I think it refers to them getting killed by the meteor. But
wow,
I mean that's just their interpretation. It's hard to tell. It could be an echo of Orpheus, or I mean the traveling through the snow seems to be.
The thing is, I didn't see it as Orpheus. I saw it as the Odyssey, where Penelope is waiting at home for Odysseus when he comes back. She waits 30 years or however long, and then he comes home and she's there waiting for him.
Yeah.
I guess if you want to impose the Orpheus thing on it, then maybe that you have to read it that way. But if you read it as Odyssey, then he gets home at the end, and that's the end. And there's a beautiful shooting star overhead, which is a meteor.
But yeah, I think maybe he wants us to he wants to leave it up to us what happens.
Yeah.
So if we think it didn't hit the house, then it didn't hit the house. Any other points you wanted to make about this?
Oh, I picked up some clever things, but we talked about the ending, so you might as well end it there. There's other things I could say that would make me sound really smart, but we've come to a
well, go ahead. I mean, I've had a trifecta of good points here, so.
Well, I don't know. It's going to be anticlimactic, but anyway, I picked up some things like when he builds the treehouse at the end, he sees one bird fly away out of the tree. And earlier, he gets on the subway and he sees one bird and he seems to question it. Like, why would a bird be alone? And then he sees the bird and he doesn't question it. And then a fly, in the next panel, a fly lands on his face and he doesn't swat it. Whereas earlier, the mosquito landed on him and he swatted it. And, things like Willie, Polyp confronts Willie and says, "You don't look like a dancer." But at the same time, Polyp has never built any of his architectural designs. Things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Anyway, nothing nearly as awesome as the stuff that you.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
This is Tim back in 2024. As we stated in the review, Asterios Polyp by David Mazzucchelli is published by Pantheon. Kumar is the co-host of the podcast Comic Book Movie Oblivion, about relatively obscure movies based on comics. If you're enjoying our comics discussion every week, consider supporting this podcast by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on X Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. Via our site, you can also shop on Amazon to support the show and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Are you making a comic? Send us that and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. In the show notes, you'll find a link to our listener survey. Help us up by following the link and giving your opinions of this podcast. Next week, Kumar and I look at the 1980s collection The Greatest Superman Stories Ever Told, as well as Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is currently being published in a collection with 2 other Moore Superman stories. Are these actually the greatest Superman stories? It's a flashback to episode 479 from December 28, 2015. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.